Welcome to eDiscovery Leaders Live, where I get a chance to chat with luminaries in eDiscovery and related areas. This broadcast is sponsored by Reveal-Brainspace, the industry's leading AI eDiscovery platform. Don't forget to subscribe to watch me, George Socha, weekly with leaders in eDiscovery. Thank you for tuning in. Welcome to eDiscovery Leaders Live, hosted by ACEDS and sponsored by Reveal. I am George Socha, heading up brand awareness at Reveal. On each episode of eDiscovery Leaders Live, I get the chance to chat with luminaries in eDiscovery and related areas. Past episodes are available on the Reveal website. Go to revealdata.com, select resources, then select eDiscovery Leaders Live. Our guest this week is James Vinson. James is Director of eData Client Services at Morgan, Lewis & Bockius. Morgan Lewis to most of us. James, welcome.
Thanks for having me. I recognize a lot of those faces in that intro video, and luminaries, that's a high bar. So a little bit of pressure for Friday morning.
A little bit of pressure. We're going to put a lot of pressure on you.
That's great. Sounds wonderful.
Well, before we get into the substance of what we're going to talk about, I'd like you to tell us a little bit about who you are, in particular, what brought you to eDiscovery, and then what you do today.
Sure. So I'm currently in the Philadelphia area. I'm married. I have 2 dogs that I spend a lot of time chasing around that have very high energy and keep me busy. And as you mentioned, I'm at Morgan Lewis, where I was thinking about it this morning. I am somewhere around 18 or 19 years. I've kind of lost track. So I think that more than 15, but less than 20. And I started here as a paralegal in the labor and employment group. And I transitioned into working in eDiscovery after about a year and a half, 2 years of being a paralegal. And then before being at Morgan Lewis, where I've been for a while, I was at Sullivan and Cromwell in Washington, D.C., working as, I think we called them legal assistants back then. I don't know if that title still exists, but over the years, I've done a lot of paralegal work, trial work. I've sat in the hot seat. And then I've worked as an eDiscovery project manager. And in my current role, I am managing and leading the eDiscovery project management team here at Morgan Lewis. We're about, 15, 16 people all over the country. So it stays pretty interesting. And, I think a lot of people who got into this in the, let's say the 2004, 2005 area, I don't think we woke up one day and said, I'm going to go look for a job in eDiscovery. We fell into it a little bit. I came at it from the paralegal side and started working on projects with ESI and scanned paper. And, it's just kind of continued to go from there as the industry and the business has evolved over the last, whatever you want to call it, 15, 20, 25 years.
And there are now people who actually, while they are in school, make the decision to go into eDiscovery. It's kind of a mind-bending concept, right?
It is totally mind-bending, and it does. It blows my mind a little bit. The business and the industry has come a long way. It's really interesting to think back to how we did things. I actually am one of the people that has used the manual bait stamp tool. That's how and I don't even remember the government agency anymore. I think it was the SEC. I think for the SEC back in 2001, 2002, my very first job, we had to hand bait stamp filings and then walk them over. I think we used a courier or whatever, but I did do it. I had it with the ink pad, and you had to put the ink in, and you would test to make sure you were starting at the right number, because if you messed that up, it was kind of game over.
Right.
And you had to manually, move it back and all that fun stuff. So I guess I am dating myself a bit there, but to go from that to how we work now is totally different. Yeah.
And then that stamp would jam, and that would be a problem.
And you'd run out of ink, and then it would be blurry, and you'd have to try to fix that, and it never looked right. And and just doing it by hand, and pages would stick together. And not the most efficient way to work in the world, but
It was what we had at the time.
It was what we had. We had to do what we had to do, and it got done, and it was fine.
So project management means so many different things to different people, even just in the world of litigation, investigation, and the like. What's your take, and what's your organization's take on what project management is in this context?
Sure. Now I need to also go and see what they're teaching people in school, because my definition probably diverges, or maybe it lines up. I don't know. But for us, our project manager, so we do have a dedicated e-discovery practice. That's the eData practice. And we've gone by different names over the years. It's switched over time, but it's been eData now for probably 12 or 15 years. And we've always had a project management team. And for us, it's the folks who sit in between attorneys, paralegals, clients, and then our technology team, who are, say, doing the processing, running productions, getting data loaded, helping troubleshoot, cracking passwords, doing collection work. So for us, that project management layer sits between that technology team and then what we would call our clients, whether they be the internal clients, like, the Morgan Lewis partner or associates who sit down the hall from me, or, the end corporate clients. I think a lot of places, sometimes that project management role, you might be doing the processing, the production, and also be managing that relationship. But for us, we separated that into different roles. So it's a lot of, project intake, of course. It's a lot of status reporting. I think it will come as no surprise if I say, in this business, sitting in a law firm, if people don't hear from you, they assume something has gone wrong. So there's a lot of, hey, we're on it. We didn't forget about you. We got it. Don't worry about it. It's going to get done. We're on schedule. And a lot of, requirement gathering as well. So it's really that in-between layer between, again, whether that be an internal or external client and the technology team. And what goes along with that too is a lot of what we would call, almost like that consulting role around what is this e-discovery thing and I think this has changed over the last 10 years, probably. Yeah, I'd say like 10 years-ish. A lot of the new attorneys are much more technically savvy than they were 15, 18 years ago. But there's a little bit of a training element as well as people join out of law school, or maybe they've clerked or they've done something. But just even coaching them through, what are we trying to do? What are the tools? Why are we doing things the way we do? So that's what it is for us. We sit in a lot of different areas, kind of do a lot of different things, but it's really that intersection and bridging that gap between the various teams, while we hope if we're doing what we think we should be doing, trying to add value and help out the attorneys, help out our paralegals, get done what they need to get done hopefully in an efficient way, and a way that's not, too painful.
I have worked with project managers, PMPs, outside the world of e-discovery.
Yep.
The folks who are project managers within corporations, often the ones I've worked with, have made very clear that their expertise and their role is in the managing of projects, and not in any way any facet of the substance of what is being done. Mm-hmm. That doesn't work, though, in our world, does it?
No, it's different. And I know, I know what you're talking about. And my father-in-law actually managed commercial construction projects. That was his, vocation. And I would see some of his project plans. And, that's just that you're building a very large commercial building. That's a very different thing. So my personal opinion would be, you could probably do the job from a strictly project management perspective without that subject matter expertise. You probably could do it, but I think you add more value and you do it better when you understand some aspect of this industry. Maybe you have more of a technical skill set, and so you can talk more about some of the technical aspects of data handling, or maybe forensics or processing or something like that, or maybe it's something in dealing with, say, structured data, because you have that skill set. Or like for me, having come at it from the paralegal side, I felt like what I could bring was I worked with attorneys. I helped them file briefs and motions. I went to court with them and, handed them paper, but I was there. So I ran filings to the Supreme Court and dropped them off. And, so I had a sense.
You participated in a 3-month-long trial in the middle of winter in Minnesota, right?
I did. We were talking about that before we started. And so I think for me personally, that's what I could bring, was understanding like, hey, this might seem like a crazy request on Friday, but I would have a sense of, well, the partner they're working for probably just dropped it on them. And there's a reason behind this crazy deadline. And this is what we're trying to do. So anyway, back to your kind of original comment. I think that you could do it in a non-subject matter way, not having that expertise. But I think the experience for the end user is better when you can bring some type of that, whether that's like me, a paralegal background or a technical background, or, some of our project managers are non-practicing, former attorneys, and they have their JD. So they bring that skill set as well. So it's nice to have, whether it's here or somewhere else, wherever you're doing the job, it's nice to have, I think, a blend of those experiences where you can kind of bring something else, to the table from your background to help out, in some way. I think they're all beneficial. There's no one, I think, skill set or background or toolkit, if you want to go that route on, how to do the job.
Whatever context you bring to the table, from what you said earlier, a big part of what you all are doing is adding consultative value, not being button pushers, but being so much more. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for asking. And with all these things too, I always caveat, like, this is aspirational. I think we do a very good job, and I'm really proud of the team. I think they do great work. I view my role to kind of get out of their way and let them do their thing. And one of the things I think we do well, and I think we can always strive to do better, is that consultative value piece. I think I've already said add value a couple of times here. It's something we try to emphasize, but I think there's a way to do the job. And I appreciate that on a day-to-day basis. People get busy, you're trying to get things done. People have lives, they have dogs or kids or hobbies or, whatever it might be. And sometimes you're just trying to get that production out the door or get that new data up into the database. But I think where we can differentiate, not just at Morgan Lewis, but as project managers across the industry, or whatever you call that role, whatever that title is at a service provider or another law firm or, wherever, consultant, is trying to really think about when something comes in, whether it's a paralegal or an attorney, what are they trying to accomplish? Because sometimes they don't really know how to ask for what they need. And so you can take a set of instructions and you can just run with them, and that can be okay. But how can you think about, okay, I always use the search term example. I got this set of search terms. Sure, I can go execute them, but what are they really trying to get at? And that's where I think the expertise of people who do this, who either know the technical element of how search syntax works in a review platform, or have some sense of like, hey, I see this. I think what you're trying to get at is this. I think that's where people in this role can really add that consultative value, where you're not just, as you said, button pushers kind of going through the motions and just getting it done.
So flesh out that search term example for me a little bit more.
Yeah. Okay. So if people are still tuned in at the 15-minute mark, I guess they're in this industry. So we'll go a little, what I would say, a little nerdy here. So here's what I mean by that. How many times has someone in the project management role or whatever similar role, you get a really long set of search terms, and the very first one is something like PRIC asterisk. So price, pricing, prices, whatever. And then under that, you get pricing and a whole bunch of things, prices and a whole bunch of things, all these variations that include the word price. And you get that. So you can get that. You can look at it and go, for whatever tool I'm using, this syntax is correct. So that's a, technical check, right?
Right.
Okay. That's fine. You can go run that. You can provide a hit report, or you can just do that. Or you can take a moment and go like, hey, really busy attorney, I know you're also just trying to get this done, but can we talk about this for 5 minutes? Your very first term, because of the way that's set up, the rest of your terms do not matter for data culling purposes, because the way you wrote that, all those other terms are subsumed, in that first term. So we can go run that. That's fine. We can do that. But like, what are you trying to do? Do you have those all written just because you want it to appear highlighted in different ways? Or is this actually an exercise where we're still at a point that we can negotiate those terms or something, because you have this super broad term up top, and then everything else that may appear narrow in a hit report, it doesn't matter. And so that's what I'm talking about as one example, which I guess might be kind of my pet peeve, where you can take that, you can just run it. Okay. But you can try to slow things down a little bit, which again, I appreciate, not always possible in the business. I totally get it. Or you might be working with someone who's also under a lot of pressure from the senior associate or the partner they're working for, and calling time out and being like, we're going to evaluate these search terms. It just might not work in that situation. So I do get it. But that's where I think people in the e-discovery space, again, no matter what your title is and who you work for, that's where I think people can show that value add. And, back to what you said too, because it's something we'll say here, is, not be that button pusher or just the instruction taker, to go back and kind of have that conversation. So that's one that I think it's a pretty easy example to understand. And I think it's one that if you've kind of been in this business and done this job in some role, I would bet that you've run into an example like that, at least once or twice.
I heard, I think, a few themes in what you said there. One of them is that it's important to exercise a well-informed, independent judgment. Am I reading that properly?
I would agree with you there. And we can get all the appropriate caveats about the practice of law and legal advice and all those things. And, how every time I meet someone, I say, I work at a law firm. I'm not a lawyer, but yes, well-informed. Yes.
And you are working under the supervision of,
correct,
and at the direction of a lawyer. That doesn't mean your brain turns off.
Right. Yes. I would agree that is a theme. Yes.
Yep. So another theme I heard in there is that people management skills are a critically important part of this job.
I would agree with that. I will say, from my own experience, I am working on my own emotional intelligence and how I work with others. It is an area that I will share I'm not always the best at. So, but I think that's critically part of it. And I think the legal industry is a high pressure, high stress situation. And you do have to read the room, because it just might not be the right time to say, hey, let's talk about your search terms.
Yeah. And part of what you're dealing with, I think, in my experience, lawyers are, shall we say, smarter than the average bear. That's one of the things I've enjoyed over the decades about working with lawyers, is that on the whole, they're a very smart lot.
Yes.
But they can also be a determined and obstinate lot. Put those two together, and that creates a challenge for you. Because they're smart, they know what they're doing, or they think they know what they're doing. They're going to be very adept at convincing you that they really do know what they're doing, but sometimes you know better. And when you know better and you're working with someone who is that smart and experienced, and yet this is an area they don't know so well, even if they think they do, how do you help them navigate to the right place? As one who's had to be navigated.
Yeah. I think I side there a little bit, because I also want to be mindful that I am 20 something years into my career. So would I have answered this question the same way when I was 22 in my first job?
Of
No.
course not.
And if I was listening to this and I was younger in my career and I hear what I'm about to say, I'd probably be like, well, I can't do that. So, but what I would say is through that experience, try not to take it personally. I think with rare exceptions, and I've worked with a lot of different attorneys over my 22 years or 21 years in the business, whatever it is, there are a very small number who, okay, probably, yeah, take it personally. Like they might not like you and whatever. But for the most part, by and large, I don't know, 99 point whatever percent, people are busy, they're under pressure, they're under stress, they're trying to meet very difficult, if not impossible demands themselves. So try not to take it personally. And also I would, as the never been to law school, but having worked with attorneys for a long time, I always keep in mind that some of it is in the training where I think that you're trained to be a little skeptical and you're trained to push back a bit. So if you can, and I know this is not easy, but if you can approach those interactions from a place of, they're not questioning me personally.
It's
a little
right. We are trained to be skeptical. We are trained to push back, and we are trained to be proud that we are trained to do both of those things. And for good reason, all of it.
And like you said, smart in a lot of different areas. And knowledgeable about, if you're working in a particular industry, really knowledgeable about that client's industry and really being able to go deep on it. Like that's really impressive. So you are dealing. So that's what I'd be like. It's not personal. Like, so just try to roll with it a little bit, and it's okay to challenge a bit. It's okay to push back a bit. And I think most people will get that. Of course, there's exceptions to everything, but I do think most people will appreciate it. Maybe not in the moment, but they will, and will be receptive.
Another theme I've been hearing and what you've been saying is that for all of this to work well, it really should not be transactional. This is about relationships, about developing, maintaining, grooming, and improving those relationships so that things can work better. Am I right in hearing that?
I totally agree with you. And I think we all in this industry, I think by and large, functioned very well during COVID. We could work remotely. We kept on doing it. But I do think this is an area where maybe not being in the office as much, where you take a little hit on the relationship front. So I do think that's where spending some time with people, even if it's coffee, whatever, so that you have some of that trust and goodwill in the bank for later. That's where it's really important. And getting away from, just that transactional nature of like, here's your production, here's this, here's that. That's where it's important to have some relationships with people. Because it's just easier. I think we all have had this experience. It's harder to, I'm looking at you, I'm talking to you. If we were maybe not in agreement right now over something, it's a little harder to yell at each other, where over email or text, which I hate, there's no tone of voice. You can't tell, things get misinterpreted.
There's no nuance.
There's no nuance. So trying to talk to people, even if we aren't all over the country or all over the world, and trying to make it more of a relationship and less transactional. I would totally agree with that. Yes.
At the same time that COVID, of course, created all sorts of challenges, it opened some opportunities to work more effectively across the country, across the world. Any lessons learned from that experience that are useful applying forward?
So I'll just call myself out on that, where I tend to personally get a little, I think my personality, I will withdraw a little bit. So I found I do have to make that effort to pick up the phone or get on the video call instead of just the IM, which I just criticized. So for me, because I'm maybe not in the office every day, that's an area where I have to put in a little bit more work, because I can fall into that reliance on email or text a little bit. And just bring it back to what we were just talking about. That's not great for the relationship development to rely on email. So that's one that recently for me, 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, I've tried to refocus a little bit on, even in my own work, getting on the video or trying to, see people or make an effort to see people, because it's easy to get out of that habit. Especially I think if maybe that's how your personality might be a little predisposed. So that's one for me. That might not apply to everybody, but for me, that's one that I try to think about.
I'd like to turn to a different direction now.
Sure.
You gave one example of what you all need to work with in terms of adding consultative value with some of the challenges that can arise with search terms. Another area has to be what happens when a new matter comes in the door.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I think that's another area where if a new matter comes in and an attorney comes, and it's probably an email these days. It used to be show up in your door with the hard drive, right? That really doesn't happen anymore. Hey, client just sent me X. Can we get started? Okay, we can take that and we can just run with it. We can set up a database, get the data in there. Okay, go do your thing. But similar to the search term example, where that's an opportunity to slow down a little bit and try to learn a little bit more about what's going on. Maybe if we haven't worked with that person, their practice or the type of cases they tend to handle. And one came up a couple weeks ago, I guess now, maybe a month or two, where one of our project managers had like 200 gigabytes come in for a case, and they were able to look it up on our internal, intranet and see that it was a single plaintiff employment case. And so for that project manager, that then triggered for them like, hey, okay, that's not terribly unusual. That's definitely possible. But do we really need to look at 200 gigs of data on a single plaintiff employment case? Maybe we do. Like, this goes back to the judgment piece and, working at the direction of attorneys. We do. That's great. That's fine. We'll go do that. But that prompted them to reach out to that attorney and say, hey, this is what I noticed. Is this what you were expecting? What are you trying to get done here? And it was that in that conversation that they kind of learned that volume of data for that set of custodians is not what that attorney was expecting. And then that led to the conversation back with the client to go, hey, this is what you sent us. I don't think this is really what we were looking for. Can we revisit this? So I use that project manager. Like, that's a great example where someone could have just like head down, blinders on, get in database, go. And that might have been fine, but we also might have had way more data than we needed to. Would have cost the client more money, would have slowed things down. But they kind of took that initiative to go, okay, hey, wait a minute. Let's just stop and have this conversation here and figure out where to go. And I like the searching example, and I like that example because throughout the process of what we do, I think there's always, whatever you want to call them, opportunities or touch points to reach out, check in, develop those relationships as well. Even if that attorney was like, everything, that was exactly what I expected. Great, go. Well, now they've at least had a conversation that they might not have had before. So those are all chances for the team to show like, hey, we know what we're doing. We're subject matter experts. We want to try to help you. How can we help you? To look for those opportunities to add value throughout the process.
So I think we'll see if this is really true. I'm going to say it right now. 2 final related questions.
Okay.
But I might be asking more questions. We'll see.
Okay.
They're both on the same theme. One is at the individual level, and the other is at the organizational, particularly law firm level.
Okay.
If you are an individual coming into this now without the benefit of 15 or 20 years experience, if you are a law firm coming to this saying, yeah, we've been doing this stuff kind of, but we really need to get our act together and help our lawyers, our attorneys deliver a higher quality result. How do folks get started? How do they get from nowhere to where you all are now?
Very good questions. For the individual person, I think whatever you want to call it, mentorship, a buddy system, something. So if you were joining an organization at, maybe earlier in your career or not as much experience, even if there's not a formal, hey, this is your buddy, like find a buddy. I'd say that's probably one of the best things you can do right away is, okay, who seems to have their act together, or, talk to people, find out, and reach out to that person and learn. Because, and I think this is true of any organization. I think in any business, there's a lot of informal practices, right? Things that it's not going to be in the handbook. You're just not going to know. So find someone who's been there, who can figure it out. There's also a lot of, in this industry too, which is a lot different than it was, 15, 20 years ago, there's a lot of professional resources out there now too. There's organizations, there's conferences. So those are other ways. There's a lot.
ACEDS, for example.
ACEDS, for example,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of, I'll add, free material online that you can educate yourself. So I think those are two good ways. I think the second question is a bit more challenging because organizations are a bit more challenging. There's more decision makers. You can kind of control what you do or, how you approach it as an individual. As an organization, I guess I would lean a little on the same things, find some experts to talk to and do your fact finding, talk to people. Again, you can rely on industry events and organizations to kind of see what other groups are doing and kind of educate yourselves that way. But then I think there's a lot of different ways to do this thing. There's vendors, there's providers, there's software companies, there's consulting groups, and you can set it up differently. You can tackle it differently. So I think at some level, you're going to have to think about what are your organization's goals and what makes sense for you, because what works one place might not work in another organization's culture or with whatever their financial goals are. So I'm going to dodge the second one a little bit because I think it's a little bit more complex, and I think it depends a lot on that organization.
You're suggesting, I think, that we would have to devote an entire episode just to that question.
I think you would, and I think we could have it. I think there would be a very interesting conversation to have with how different types of organizations or similar organizations have set up to approach the same problem. So, in Morgan Lewis, we do it one way. I think we do it really well. I mean, I've been here for a long time, so I'm clearly biased, but that might not work somewhere else. And somebody else can go, that's not going to work for us. And they could also be right. So like everything in life, it's complicated.
And we'll stop at that point. It's complicated. James, thank you for joining us this week. James Vinson is Director of eData Client Services at Morgan Lewis. I am George Socha. This has been eDiscovery Leaders Live, hosted by ACEDS and sponsored by Reveal. James, thanks so much for joining us this week.
Thanks for having me.